The floor of humiliation. The marble floors inside the park Sang estate were famous. Visitors admired them. Guests complimented them. Every tile shined like glass beneath the warm golden lights of the mansion. But that night, someone was on her knees cleaning them. A woman with dark skin, calm eyes, and quiet dignity. Her name was Amara Johnson, the daughter-in-law of one of the wealthiest families in Seoul. Yet she was kneeling on the floor with a bucket and cloth, scrubbing, over and over again. Behind her stood Mrs. Park Sang-hee, elegant, rich, and cruel. She swirled red wine slowly in a crystal glass while watching Amara clean. "Scrub harder," she said sharply. Amara didn't respond. She simply kept working. The cloth moved slowly across the marble surface. Soap bubbles gathered around her hands. Behind the hallway door, two maids whispered, "That's the chairman's daughter-in-law. I heard she's from Africa. Why would the young master marry someone like her?" Their whispers were quiet, but Amara heard them clearly. Still, she said nothing, because arguing inside this house always ended the same way, with humiliation. Across the hallway stood Daniel Park, Amara's husband. He looked uncomfortable, but he remained silent. His mother controlled everything: the family companies, the inheritance, even his decisions. Mrs. Park took a sip of wine. "You should be grateful," she said coldly. Amara paused slightly. "For what?" she asked calmly. Mrs. Park smirked. "For marrying into a respectable Korean family." She leaned closer. "Women like you don't usually get such opportunities." The maids giggled quietly. Daniel looked away, and Amara slowly returned to scrubbing the floor. But deep inside, something stirred. A memory. A voice. A powerful voice that once told her, "Never allow the world to decide your worth." The voice belonged to her father, a man the world feared, a man the underworld called the Black Emperor. But inside this mansion, no one knew who she truly was. Years earlier, Amara Johnson had lived a very different life. She grew up surrounded by luxury, private security, international travel, and whispered conversations about power. Her father ruled a vast underground empire stretching from Lagos to Europe and Asia. His name was Victor Johnson. To the outside world, he was a businessman. But within the shadows, he controlled one of the most powerful criminal syndicates on Earth. Politicians feared him. Cartels respected him. Governments watched him. But to Amara, he was simply her father, and he loved her deeply, which is why he warned her many times. "This world is dangerous," Victor once told her. "Power attracts enemies." Amara had different dreams. She didn't want an empire. She wanted freedom. So when she received a scholarship to study in London, she took it. And for the first time in her life, she felt normal. No bodyguards. No political meetings. No whispered deals. Just university life. Books. Friends. And quiet independence. That's where she met Daniel Park. He was kind, intelligent, and refreshingly simple compared to the ruthless people she grew up around. They spent long evenings studying together, walking through the rainy streets of London, sharing dreams about the future. Daniel never cared about money or status. He simply liked her, and that was rare. When he proposed 2 years later, Amara said yes, but she made one decision. She hid her real identity, because she wanted to know something important. Would someone still love her? Without power, without wealth, without fear. At first, everything seemed perfect. But that changed the moment she met Daniel's mother. The first time Amara entered the Park mansion in Seoul, she felt the tension immediately. Mrs. Park's eyes scanned her carefully, from head to toe, judging, evaluating, disapproving. "So you are the girl Daniel wants to marry," she said coldly. Amara bowed respectfully. "Yes, madam." Mrs. Park didn't smile. "You're not Korean." "No. You're not wealthy." Amara hesitated slightly. "Not particularly." Mrs. Park scoffed. "Then explain why my son should marry you." Daniel tried to intervene. "Mother, I love." But Mrs. Park raised her hand, silencing him instantly. Her eyes returned to Amara. "You must understand something," she said. "Our family has a reputation. Marriage is not just romance. It is strategy." Amara answered calmly. "I understand." Mrs. Park leaned closer. "But clearly you don't." That day marked the beginning of a long series of humiliations. Mrs. Park criticized everything. Amara's accent, her clothing, her background, her presence in the family. And slowly, the mansion became a prison. 6 months after the wedding, things became worse. One evening, during a family gathering, a glass of wine accidentally spilled on the marble floor. Mrs. Park looked directly at Amara. "You made the mess." Amara frowned slightly. "But I didn't." "Clean it." The command was sharp. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, the staff can handle." "I said clean it." Amara remained silent. Then slowly, she knelt. The guests watched awkwardly, some embarrassed, others curious. Amara cleaned the stain quietly. But just as she finished, Mrs. Park tilted her wine glass. Red liquid spilled across the marble again, right where Amara had cleaned. "Start again." The room fell silent. And that moment changed everything. Because humiliation has limits, even for the most patient people. Later that night, Amara sat alone in her room. The city lights of Seoul glowed outside the window. Her phone vibrated suddenly. An encrypted message appeared. A communication channel she hadn't seen in years. Her father's network. The message was short. 3 words. "The emperor is dying." Her breath caught. Below the message was a location. Hong Kong. And one final line. "Return immediately. The empire needs its heir." Amara stared at the screen for a long time. The life she abandoned was calling her back. Downstairs in the mansion, Mrs. Park continued complaining about her. Still unaware. Still arrogant. Still cruel. She had no idea that the quiet woman she forced to scrub floors was the daughter of the most feared man in the global underworld. And if Amara chose to reclaim her throne, the entire world would soon discover they had been humiliating a queen. The morning sun had barely risen over Seoul when the quiet neighborhood surrounding the Park mansion suddenly became very busy. At first, it was only the distant hum of engines. Low, heavy, powerful. Then one car appeared at the end of the street. A long black armored SUV. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, 10 vehicles formed a slow-moving convoy approaching the gates of the Park Sang estate. Neighbors peeked through their windows. Security guards at nearby homes stepped outside. Because these were not normal vehicles. These were military-grade armored transports. Inside the Park mansion, a maid rushed into the living room. "Madam, there are many vehicles outside." Mrs. Park frowned. "What vehicles?" "Black SUVs, many of them." Daniel looked up from the table. "Maybe a business delegation." Mrs. Park shook her head. "No one visits without my approval." They walked toward the front windows. Outside the gates, the convoy stopped. Doors opened, and men stepped out. Tall, serious, dressed in perfectly tailored black suits. Earpieces in place, eyes scanning every direction. Professional bodyguards. Mrs. Park whispered nervously, "What is this?" Then one final car rolled forward. A long black limousine. The door opened slowly, and a familiar figure stepped out. Amara. But she didn't look like the same woman who left the house hours earlier. Her posture was different. Her confidence was different. And the men around her treated her with absolute respect. Mrs. Park's eyebrows tightened. What is going on? Inside the limousine, Amara sat quietly. Across from her sat a man with sharp eyes and calm authority. His name was Marcus Way. For years, he had served as the most trusted strategist of her father, Victor Johnson. Marcus studied her carefully. You look exactly like him. Amara stared out the window. That's not a compliment. Marcus smiled faintly. Your father built an empire across 3 continents. He expects you to inherit it. I never asked for it. Marcus leaned back in his seat. No one asks for power. You're born into it. Outside, the convoy moved through the city streets of Seoul. Marcus handed her a tablet. Intelligence reports. Amara glanced at the screen. Maps. Financial networks. Criminal alliances. The global operations of the Johnson Syndicate. 3 rival organizations are preparing to attack our territory once your father dies, Marcus explained. Where? He tapped the screen. Europe. Russia. Asia. Amara closed the tablet slowly. How long does he have? Marcus hesitated. Not long. The limousine continued toward the private airport. And for the first time in years, Amara began stepping back into the world she once escaped. Back at the Park mansion, confusion had turned into anxiety. Mrs. Park paced the living room. Who were those men? Daniel tried to remain calm. I don't know. Why were they calling Amara ma'am? Daniel had no answer. One of the household maids entered nervously. Madam, the men outside asked if they could retrieve Miss Amara's luggage. Mrs. Park froze. They said that. Yes. And they called her Madam Johnson. Daniel frowned. Johnson. Mrs. Park's voice sharpened. That's her last name. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, she changed her name after marriage. Mrs. Park felt a strange chill. Something about this situation didn't make sense. She grabbed her phone. Call the private investigators. What for? I want to know exactly who Amara Johnson really is. Hours later, the private jet soared through the clouds, leaving Seoul far behind. Inside the luxurious cabin, Marcus reviewed documents while Amara sat quietly near the window. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly. Marcus finally spoke. You're unusually calm. Amara didn't look away from the window. I've had years to think about this moment. You ran from this life. Yes. Why? She finally turned toward him. Because power corrupts everything. Marcus nodded slowly. That may be true. But weakness destroys everything faster. Amara said nothing. Marcus continued. When your father built the syndicate, he created balance between dangerous people. If that balance collapses, war will follow. Amara understood exactly what he meant. Without a strong leader, the empire would tear itself apart. The jet began descending. Lights appeared below. The glowing skyline of Hong Kong. Marcus closed his tablet. The council is waiting. The private hospital, overlooking the harbor of Hong Kong, was heavily guarded. Armed security surrounded every entrance. Inside the top floor, A quiet room held the most powerful man in the underworld. Victor Johnson, the Black Emperor. Amara stepped inside slowly. The once powerful man now looked weak. Machines surrounded his bed. But when he saw her, his eyes lit up. Amara. She rushed to his side. I'm here. Victor smiled faintly. You tried to escape. I wanted a normal life. He chuckled softly. There is no normal life for our family. Marcus stood respectfully near the door. Victor studied his daughter carefully. You're stronger now. Amara squeezed his hand. I learned from you. Victor's voice grew serious. The council will test you. I know. They will doubt you. I expect it. Victor nodded slowly. That means you're ready. He took a deep breath. When I'm gone, the empire will belong to you. Amara's eyes hardened. I won't let it fall. Victor smiled proudly. That's my daughter. Outside the hospital, the city lights of Hong Kong reflected across the dark harbor waters. Across continents, enemies were already preparing for the emperor's death. But they didn't yet understand something. The next ruler would be even more dangerous. Back in Seoul, Mrs. Park received the first report from her investigators. She opened the file impatiently. Tell me what you found. The investigator hesitated. It's complicated. Mrs. Park slammed the desk. Speak clearly. The man swallowed. We traced her birth records. And she was born in Lagos. Mrs. Park waved dismissively. I already know that. The investigator continued nervously. But her father. Mrs. Park leaned forward. What about him? The investigator opened a second file. And when Mrs. Park read the name, her face turned completely pale. Victor Johnson. Below the name were hundreds of intelligence reports. International crime networks. Billions in assets. Political influence. Private military forces. Mrs. Park whispered slowly. That's impossible. Daniel looked over her shoulder. What is it? She turned toward him, her voice trembling. Your wife is the daughter of the most powerful mafia boss in the world. The room fell silent. And suddenly, every cruel word she had ever spoken to Amara echoed inside her mind. Rain poured over the skyline of Hong Kong that night. Thunder rolled across the harbor, while waves slapped against the concrete docks below. Inside the private medical wing overlooking the city, silence hung heavy in the air. Doctors whispered quietly in the hallway. Armed guards stood motionless outside every door. Because inside that room, the most feared man in the criminal underworld was dying. Amara sat beside the hospital bed. The machines around her father beeped slowly. Weakly, her father, Victor Johnson, looked far smaller than she remembered. The once unstoppable emperor now struggled just to breathe. Yet when he looked at her, the same powerful fire remained in his eyes. You came back, he whispered. Of course I did, Amara replied softly. Victor smiled faintly. I knew you would. Outside the window, lightning flashed across the dark skyline of Hong Kong. Victor's voice grew weaker. The council will not accept you easily. I don't expect them to. They respect power. Amara squeezed his hand. Then they'll respect me. Victor chuckled quietly. That confidence, you truly are my daughter. He paused for a moment. Then his expression turned serious. There are traitors inside the syndicate. Amara's eyes sharpened. Who? I don't know yet. Victor struggled to breathe. But they're waiting for me to die, so they can take control. Amara leaned closer. That won't happen. Victor studied her carefully. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to relax. Then my empire is safe. The machines beside the bed suddenly began slowing. The doctor stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Johnson. Victor ignored him. Instead, he looked only at his daughter. Promise me something. What? Never kneel to anyone. Amara's voice was steady. I promise. Victor smiled one last time. Then the machine beside him let out a long, continuous tone. The Black Emperor was gone. The news spread across the underworld like wildfire. Within hours, encrypted messages traveled across continents. The Black Emperor was dead. And now the Johnson syndicate needed a new ruler. Deep inside a secure compound in Hong Kong, 12 of the most powerful figures in the criminal world gathered around a circular table. The council. Each member controlled entire regions of the syndicate's operations. Representatives from Dubai, Lagos, Shanghai, Moscow. They were dangerous people, and none of them liked uncertainty. Marcus Way stood near the entrance. The heir has arrived. The doors opened. Amara walked inside calmly. Her black suit was simple but elegant. Her posture confident. Yet the room immediately filled with skepticism. One council member leaned forward. You disappeared for years. Another added coldly. You abandoned the empire. A large Russian man folded his arms. We followed your father because he was strong. Why should we follow you? His name was Sergei Volkov, a brutal warlord who controlled operations across Eastern Europe. Amara walked slowly to the center of the room. Then she placed both hands on the table. You shouldn't follow me, she said calmly. The council looked confused. She continued. You should follow results. Sergei smirked. And what results do you offer? Amara tapped the table lightly. Marcus activated the large screen behind her. Financial records appeared. Then intelligence reports. Then surveillance footage. The council members leaned closer. What is this? Someone asked. Amara answered calmly. These are the 3 rival syndicates that planned to divide our empire once my father died. Sergei frowned. Yes, we know about them. Amara's voice remained steady. They're gone. The room froze. Gone, the woman from Dubai asked. Marcus stepped forward. The heir eliminated them before returning to Hong Kong. Silence fell across the table. Sergei stared at Amara for several seconds. Then he slowly nodded. Respect had replaced doubt. But the council still needed proof. Sergei snapped his fingers. 2 guards dragged a man into the room. The prisoner was bleeding. Terrified, Marcus whispered to Amara. A traitor. Sergei addressed the council. This man sold information about our shipments. He turned toward Amara. A ruler must show strength. Sergei placed a pistol on the table. Decide his fate. The entire room watched carefully. The prisoner began crying. Please, I have a family. Amara stepped closer. She looked down at the man. For a moment, the room wondered if she would hesitate. Instead, she picked up the gun calmly. One single shot echoed through the hall. The prisoner collapsed instantly. Amara placed the pistol back on the table. If betrayal spreads, the empire dies. No one spoke. Sergei leaned back slowly. Then he raised his hand. I vote to crown her. One by one. Every council member followed. Marcus finally spoke. All hail the new leader of the Johnson syndicate. The room bowed. Queen Amara. Thousands of miles away in Seoul, the Park mansion was in complete chaos. Mrs. Park paced the living room nervously. I want more information. The investigator on the phone sounded uncomfortable. Madam, the situation is complicated. I don't care. Your daughter-in-law's father controlled one of the most powerful criminal networks in the world. Mrs. Park's hands trembled. And now she's the heir. Mrs. Park nearly dropped the phone. Daniel sat silently on the couch, trying to process everything. His wife, the quiet woman who washed dishes in their kitchen, was now one of the most powerful people on earth. Mrs. Park whispered in horror. "We forced her to scrub floors." Daniel's voice was quiet. "She never fought back." Mrs. Park covered her mouth. "What if she comes back?" Neither of them answered. Because deep down, they both knew. If Amara returned to Seoul as the queen of the Johnson syndicate, their lives would never be the same again. Months had passed since Amara's triumphant return to Seoul. The world had changed, and so had she. From Seoul to Dubai, her influence spread like wildfire. Rival syndicates had been eliminated or brought into her fold. International intelligence reports now carried one repeated line. Amara Johnson, the Queen of Shadows. Her empire had expanded to Europe, Africa, and Asia. Marcus stood beside her in the command center of her Seoul headquarters, overlooking digital maps of every operation. "Every faction is loyal," he said. Amara didn't respond immediately. She was watching the screens. "Not just loyal," she corrected him. "They're afraid, and respect comes after fear, but respect comes first from action." Her words echoed through the room, leaving no doubt. She was no longer the submissive daughter-in-law who had scrubbed the marble floors. Meanwhile, Mrs. Park's world collapsed. News outlets in Seoul had caught wind of Amara's return and rise to power. Headlines screamed, "Seoul heiress scrubbed floors, now runs global empire." Park family humiliated by former daughter-in-law. In a televised interview, Mrs. Park attempted to salvage her dignity. I never imagined," she stammered. But the camera lens captured the tremor in her hands, the shame in her eyes. Daniel watched helplessly. He had known the woman he loved was powerful, but even he hadn't realized how completely Amara had transformed. The city whispered her name with reverence and fear. Amara's next move was decisive. The Park family had always controlled multiple businesses, but Amara had spent months studying every ledger, every contract, every loophole. With surgical precision, she orchestrated a hostile takeover of the Park conglomerate. Board members were replaced overnight. Assets were frozen. Executives loyal to Mrs. Park were sidelined or quietly retired. By the end of the week, Amara Johnson controlled everything. The family mansion, the corporation, financial holdings worth billions. And when she finally entered the Park headquarters, it was with her elite guards flanking her, every step echoing in the polished halls. Mrs. Park, once the queen of the house, was now a guest. Amara's voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "You see, mother-in-law, power is not given. It is claimed." The ultimate confrontation took place where it all began. The main hall of the Park mansion, the same marble floors Amara had scrubbed. Mrs. Park knelt, hands trembling, staring at the tiles. "Please, I beg your forgiveness," she whispered. Amara's eyes held no malice, only quiet strength. "You don't need forgiveness," she said. "You need to remember." Amara gestured to the marble. "This is where lessons are learned." The mother-in-law's pride crumbled completely. For the first time in decades, she understood humility. Amara turned away, signaling her guards to leave. As she exited, she left behind a message that would echo through the family and the city. Strength is earned, respect is commanded, mercy is a choice. Months later, as the world adjusted to the rise of Queen Amara, she stood atop her Seoul headquarters, overlooking the neon-lit skyline. A message appeared on her encrypted device. It was from Minyi, her husband. "Amara, I've seen what you've become. I know I underestimated you. I want to stand beside you, not behind you." Amara read it silently. Her life had changed beyond recognition. She had transformed a personal humiliation into global domination. Her response was simple. Stand beside me only if you are ready to face the world as it truly is. I am no longer the girl who scrubbed floors. I am the queen. Below her, the city lights glimmered like stars. Across continents, whispers began. The girl who scrubbed floors is now the ruler of empires, and her story has only just begun. The world had learned a lesson. Never underestimate the silent. Never underestimate the overlooked. Never underestimate a queen.